You know, when you picture satellite technology, you probably picture those clean rooms first. The scientists in those full-body white suits meticulously wrapping components in like gold foil.
Right, operating in these highly sterile vacuum chambers.
Exactly. There's this inherent expectation when we talk about space exploration or orbital networks that we're dealing with engineering at its absolute pinnacle. Multi-billion-dollar machines that just exist on this higher, untouchable plane of technological perfection once they hit orbit.
I mean, they really are marvels of engineering up in the vacuum of space.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is quite different when you look at the whole system.
Yeah, because when you zoom out and follow those invisible radio frequency links down from orbit back through the atmosphere until you hit the ground, you find out that multi-billion-dollar orbital masterpiece is often connecting to, well, a nondescript server rack in some industrial park.
Running an outdated commercial VPN, the contrast is honestly jarring. The digital tethers anchoring these marvels to Earth are terrifyingly fragile.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the reality is that the systems running our global economy are facing down hackers armed with off-the-shelf terrestrial malware and the existential threat of quantum computers. So, welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive designed specifically for you. We have a massive stack of intelligence to synthesize today.
We really do. We're looking at some heavy hitters.
Yeah, we've got a security report by the Bloomsbury Intelligence and Security Institute, or BSIO, an experimental study on zero-trust architecture from Cypress, plus an Argus paper on quantum-safe cryptography for satellites, and a multinational intelligence guide on securing low Earth orbit communications.
Synthesizing all of this gives us a really clear mission today. We're going to explore the structural fragility of our space-based infrastructure, uncover how adversaries actually hijack orbital networks, and, examine the cutting-edge cyber defenses being built to keep these systems from literally falling out of the sky.
So before we even look to the stars, we have to start where space meets Earth. Because you don't need a spaceship to hack a satellite. You just need to compromise the building broadcasting to it, right?
Exactly. The Bessley report zeroes in on North American ground stations as the primary strategic choke point right now.
And the scale is just wild. We're seeing providers like EchoStar launching over 8,000 low Earth orbit satellites since 2020 alone.
Right. And the ground infrastructure required to maintain telemetry with an 8,000 satellite constellation.
Nice.
It just creates this massive, sprawling attack surface.
Which is drawing the attention of two very specific types of adversaries, according to the report, Tier 5 and Tier 6 actors.
Yeah, so Tier 5 actors are sophisticated criminal syndicates. They're motivated strictly by financial gain, so they view commercial satellite operators as highly lucrative targets for ransomware.
Just a digital shakedown.
Exactly. But Tier 6 actors represent state-backed intelligence agencies and military units. Their goals are espionage, technology theft, and, the purposeful disruption of critical infrastructure.
And we don't even have to guess what a Tier 6 attack looks like, do we? The Biasi report highlights the Viasat network disruption in 2022 as sort of the defining case study.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Viasat disruption perfectly illustrates how vulnerable the terrestrial link is. The hackers didn't bother trying to spoof complex orbital communications or shoot a kinetic weapon at a satellite.
They just found a standard digital doorway.
Exactly. They identified unpatched Fortinet VPN appliances in the terrestrial ground infrastructure. They walked right through that doorway, moved laterally through the network, and deployed wiper malware.
Which just cascaded up to tens of thousands of satellite modems and basically bricked the network.
Completely brick it. And the structural problem driving this is the sheer pace of the new space race. We just don't see the kind of rigid safety regulations that govern, say, the FAA-led aviation industry.
Because everyone wants to move fast and keep costs down, so they rely heavily on commercial off-the-shelf hardware, or COTs.
It's a massive double-edged sword. Ground stations are way cheaper to build now, but they're running the exact same commercial networking equipment that hackers already know how to exploit inside and out.
They just lean on open-source intelligence and standard penetration tools. They don't have to invent a bespoke space exploit when a known bug on a standard router works just fine. It's like outfitting a military tank with state-of-the-art titanium armor, but buying the steering wheel from a discount auto parts store.
That is a perfect way to put it.
The armor doesn't matter if the steering column snaps. But wait, if these are multi-billion-dollar systems, why are operators relying on the same vulnerable COTS hardware and VPNs that, a mid-sized accounting firm might use?
Because the speed of commercial deployment is simply outpacing the development of bespoke, space-grade security hardware. It's a calculated economic risk. And for anyone wondering why a commercial ground station breach impacts their daily life, the BSIS report lays out this chilling scenario about GNSS timing signals.
Oh, right. Global financial markets rely on that, don't they?
Entirely. High-frequency trading algorithms depend on microsecond precision timing, from GNSS to timestamp trades.
So if a Tier 6 adversary breaches a ground station and subtly spoofs or delays those timing signals,
The algorithmic models would instantly panic.
you could trigger a cascading flash crash across global markets in seconds just from a ground station hack. But let's shift our focus upward. What happens when an attacker moves past the ground network and intercepts the actual communication links bouncing between Earth and the satellite?
This moves us into what the industry calls mission integrity. The ultimate prize for an adversary is the command and data handling subsystem, or the C&DHS.
Basically the brain of the satellite.
Exactly. Attackers target the C&DHS to bypass the payload and seize control of the satellite's core processing. Once they're in, they can authorize unapproved orbit modifications, permanently deactivate payloads, or even feed false telemetry back to Earth.
Making it look like everything is fine while the satellite is being weaponized. And the Cypress experimental study actually ran simulations of these unlocks. The first one is a replay attack.
Right, where the attacker sits in the middle of the transmission path and uses standard network sniffing tools. The study cites Wireshark and Ettercap.
Which are literally just standard IT tools.
Yeah, they use them to silently grab a legitimate authorized command packet right out of the air as it travels up to the satellite. They capture a sequence of code the satellite already trusts. Then they open that packet and alter a single parameter, changing the variable from event to error.
And then they use a tool called TC Preplay to just blast it back. Instead of trying to establish a new, suspicious connection, they force their network interface to blindly fire that altered raw packet at the target, completely bypassing normal handshakes.
And the satellite receives it, reads the trusted error command, and automatically forces itself into an error mode or initiates a deorbit mode.
That is wild. The attacker is literally leveraging the satellite's own safety protocols as a weapon.
It gets worse. The study details a second simulation called malicious software injection. The attacker deploys a script called fakelib.chish to exploit the Linux operating system running on the satellite.
Because Linux relies on shared libraries, which, you can kind of conceptualize as a communal toolbox that different programs share to save memory.
Exactly. So the attacker uses a utility called readelf to map out the executable files and figure out exactly which communal tools the satellite's brain uses the most.
And once they find a critical one, that fake lib script duplicates it, embeds a malicious payload inside the clone, and seamlessly swaps it with the original.
So the next time the C&DHS reaches into that communal toolbox for a standard function like calculating a trajectory, it unknowingly grabs the toxic clone and executes the malware.
And the multi-agency intelligence guide points out how this specific threat is just expanding exponentially because of optical inter-satellite links.
Right. Satellites communicating via lasers in orbit, combined with edge and cloud computing directly in space.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if an adversary successfully injects that toxic shared library into just one satellite, those optical links provide a high-speed highway for the malware to spread across the entire constellation instantly.
It's a compounding nightmare.
Let me use an analogy for the replay attack. It's like someone standing outside your house, recording you telling your smart home to turn off the lights, and then playing that exact recording back through a megaphone at 3 a.m. to plunge your house into darkness.
That's exactly how it works.
But if satellite commands are basically just radio frequency waves broadcast over a massive area, isn't it physically impossible to stop an adversary from just aiming an antenna at the sky and recording them?
Well, yeah. You cannot hide the physics of radio waves. Anyone with enough antenna gain can listen in. So the defensive paradigm can't rely on hiding the signal. It has to render the intercepted signal mathematically useless.
Which brings us to the modern software defense from the Cypress study. Zero Trust Architecture, or ZTA. If we can't stop the recording, we stop the execution.
Right. The study solves this by implementing an OpenZD framework to create a zero trust overlay network. The foundational philosophy here is never trust, always verify.
Implicit trust is just gone. And the experiment highlights this thing called the Policy Enforcement Point, or PEP.
The PEP is basically an invisible, ruthless gatekeeper on the network edge. When the attacker used TC preplay to fire that modified replay attack packet back at the satellite, the PEP intercepted it.
Even though the attacker had the correctly formatted command, the PEP demanded a continuous, dynamic cryptographic certificate to validate the session.
And because the attacker was just spoofing a recorded message, they didn't have that real-time cryptographic proof. So the PP simply dropped the connection. The command just died in the vacuum of space.
And Zero Trust was just as resilient against the software injection attack, right? By using strict microsegmentation.
Exactly. Traditional networks are like a castle with a hard outer wall and a soft interior. Once you're inside, you can roam around. ZTA microsegments every single process into an isolated cryptographic bubble.
So even if the attacker connected, the ZTA environment actively blocked them from running that readelf utility to map the file system. They were trapped. They couldn't even see the communal toolbox to swap the shared library.
They were completely locked down.
It's like a VIP club, where the bouncer doesn't just check your ID at the front door. There's a bouncer at the coat check, a bouncer at the bar, and a bouncer outside the restroom. And they all demand a fresh, cryptographic ID every single time you move.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But honestly, doesn't demanding cryptographic proof at every single microstep introduce massive delays? I mean, satellites are moving at thousands of miles an hour. How does constant verification affect performance?
What's fascinating here is that you've just identified the fundamental friction point of space cybersecurity. Overhead and latency are the mortal enemies of orbital communications.
Because every request for a certificate adds data payload. Every handshake adds a round-trip delay.
Right. For a low Earth orbit satellite, a few milliseconds might be okay. But as operations scale to medium or geostationary orbits, those milliseconds compound and can severely degrade the network.
And this friction sets up the massive cryptographic challenges outlined in the ArcSIF paper. Security protocols inherently introduce latency, but we don't have the luxury of waiting to optimize zero trust. The threat landscape is accelerating toward a quantum future.
Exactly. The researchers focused on adapting the Internet Key Exchange Protocol, specifically IKA2, which is a standard terrestrial protocol for the severe constraints of space.
Because satellites have highly restricted processing power, and they're dealing with packet loss over noisy radio links.
And while grappling with that, they are actively being targeted by harvest now decrypt later attacks.
This is the terrifying part. Adversaries are currently intercepting and recording vast oceans of encrypted satellite communications. They can't read it today because classical encryption holds up.
But they are stockpiling it in massive server farms. They're just waiting for the day they possess a quantum computer capable of shattering classical encryption. It completely alters the life cycle of data security.
Because if an agency transmits sensitive logistics today and an adversary decrypts it 5 years from now using quantum processing, the damage is still catastrophic. So the space industry is being forced to integrate post-quantum cryptography, or PQC, right now.
But the ArcSafe paper explains why integrating PQC is an absolute logistical nightmare. Post-quantum cryptographic keys are massive.
Because they rely on incredibly complex math, like lattice problems, to confuse quantum computers. So the keys are kilobytes of data instead of bits.
And they're so large, they cause IP-level fragmentation. The packets get chopped into smaller fragments. Over a high-latency satellite link, if a single fragment drops out of the sky, the whole handshake fails, and you consume your limited bandwidth with endless retries.
So the researchers tested lightweight variants of IKEva2 to find a balance. The two most viable ones are designated LW2 and LW3.
Yes. So LW2 uses a hybrid approach. It concatenates classical signatures with post-quantum signatures in a single message. It gives you robust hybrid authentication without the latency-inducing round trips back to Earth.
So it's a solid middle ground. But for networks that demand absolute maximum speed, the paper looks at LW3, which is the most aggressive optimization. LW3 completely discards dynamic negotiation.
Right. Instead of the ground and the satellite mathematically agreeing on an encryption method, LW3 uses static, pre-shared keys based on an algorithm called classic McLeese.
Which is fascinating because it relies on complex algebraic purging theory that even quantum computers struggle with.
The trade-off is it requires massive public keys, but it produces incredibly small ciphertexts and decrypts with astonishing speed. Because it uses static keys, it's highly bandwidth efficient.
But the paper explicitly notes this sacrifices perfect forward secrecy, right?
It does.
And perfect forward secrecy ensures that if someone steals a key today, they can only decrypt today's session. They can't reverse engineer past sessions. But since LW3 relies on unchanging static keys, if an adversary steals that one key, they can retroactively decrypt every single piece of Marvis's data that ever used it.
Every single bit of it.
So what does this all mean? Satellites are designed to stay up there for over a decade. Are the multi-million-dollar constellations we're launching right this second already sitting ducks for tomorrow's quantum computers because their hardware can't handle these new massive keys?
This raises an important question, and it's exactly why the multi-agency guide is sounding the alarm. Operators have to engineer hardware capable of supporting post-quantum cryptography during the initial design phase.
You have to build in the overhead today.
Exactly. So the hardware sitting on the launch pad doesn't become cryptographically obsolete the minute it reaches orbit. It is a high-stakes race against both time and physics.
Let's pull the threads of this intelligence together. We started at the ground stations, seeing how legacy COTES hardware leaves the digital steering column exposed to state-backed Tier 6 actors. Then we detailed the mission integrity failures, how tools like Wireshark and toxic shared libraries can hijack a satellite's brain.
And then we explored the defenses, implementing zero-trust overlay networks, using strict microsegmentation and PPs to render those intercepted commands useless.
Finally, we looked at the friction of adapting massive post-quantum keys for space. The threat matrix is honestly intimidating, but the mobilization against it is massive too. Their BASE report highlights the rapid emergence of a $5.2 billion secure-by-design space cybersecurity market.
We're seeing unprecedented collaboration, like the Space IS in Colorado. Fierce commercial competitors are pooling threat intelligence because the stakes are just too high to defend in isolation.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, extending beyond the digital focus of these reports. Because we've talked entirely about data today. Financial markets flashing, digital certificates, stockpiled encryption. But consider the physical reality of orbital mechanics.
The physical environment of space amplifies every digital vulnerability.
If a Tier 6 state actor successfully bypasses a ground station VPN, evades the zero-trust architecture, and uses software injection to hijack the command and data handling subsystems of a massive low-Earth orbit constellation, they aren't limited to espionage. What if they execute a command to purposely alter the trajectories of hundreds of satellites, driving them into a high-speed orbital collision?
That would be catastrophic.
The resulting cloud of shrapnel would trigger a chain reaction known as Kessler syndrome. That localized debris field would expand, tearing through orbit and physically destroying virtually every other satellite in its path. A purely digital cyber attack using terrestrial malware could permanently encase humanity beneath an impenetrable, hypervelocity shell of flying debris. Sleep tight. Keep looking up, and more importantly, keep questioning the hidden digital systems that run our world. We'll see you next time.